Hey, how are you doing, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and today we're going to be talking some must-start fantasy football wide receivers for NFL Week 10. These are players, I love the matchups. I believe they will put up very productive point totals for us in our lineups this week. And if you've got them rostered, chances are they're going to find themselves in your lineup in some way, shape, or form here this week. With that being said, though, we're not wasting any more time today. Let's hit the intro and get straight in to our first of 5 must-start wideouts here in Week 10. Alrighty, kicking things off with our first must-start player here, Terry McLaurin of the Washington football team, taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, is my first player to go out and start for lineups here in Week 10. Scary Terry, despite the inconsistency, despite the relatively unreliable numbers at times, is still one of the most talented and one of the most potentially great wide receivers in the NFL from routes, pure athleticism. The only thing that really keeps him back from being a blue chip fantasy player is consistent quarterback play. Terry McLaurin has one of the highest ceilings at the wide receiver position of anyone out there, even a large majority of the wide receiver ones we have on our fantasy teams here at the Week 10 marker. So we're basically passing the halfway point of the season. Terry McLaurin is the wide receiver 18 currently, and that's coming off of only a few huge boom performances. It's been kind of dicey so far this season, whether or not Taylor Heinicke is going to give Terry enough, and it's not even necessarily a question of the amounts of targets he's getting, but are they going to be catchable passes? Are they going to be valuable opportunities where Terry can thrive? And I think the one thing that is holding Terry back is the inconsistency of deep passing attempts towards McLaurin's direction. Once Fitzmagic gets back involved in this offense, hopefully that's something that trends up, and then over the course of the end of this season, McLaurin's numbers can skyrocket here. But against Tampa Bay, I'm going to have faith that Terry McLaurin is going to put up one of those strong performances because the weakness of this Buccaneers team is their back end, and Tampa's going to make it and make sure that the Washington football team is not able to run the ball effectively with Antonio Gibson or any of those other backs they deploy out there. Terry this week, I think, has a chance. This kid is a playmaker. Terry is a great talent. He can go out there, beat any cornerback the Buccaneers can throw at him. He's got very, very savvy routes. He's very explosive, and he can win the deep ball as well. This is a player who can run straight past others. Obviously, he's got that. He's from Ohio State, and Ohio State produces a lot of speedy players, a lot of speed demons, especially at the wide receiver and defensive back positions. McLaurin here, I'm starting him in Week 10. I think this is a great opportunity for Terry to hit on one of those boom performances. Again, it's been inconsistent, but 7 straight games of 7 or more targets. That goes back to Week 1 when he only had 4. Outside of that, 7 or more in every contest. He's getting the looks. They just need to be a little bit more accurate and give him the opportunities that he needs in a catchable pass circumstance to come down with the football and make big plays. Michael Pittman, if he isn't a must-start every week at this point, he certainly is here in Week 10. Going forward, Michael Pittman should be a part of your lineups week in and week out unless you are filthily deep at the wide receiver position. The Jacksonville Jaguars, do not be fooled. This past week, the 6 points they held the Bills to is not the expectation or something to project long term. I don't know what happened. They were playing with a fire lit under their butts. They were pressuring Josh Allen literally every drop back. And the Bills' offense was a nightmare. It was a disaster. It was honestly very, very painful to watch. The most exciting storyline of that game was Josh Allen versus Josh Allen. So when the name of the player playing in the game is the most exciting and fun part of that contest, you can tell it was a rough show. So Michael Pittman's going to come out here. This Jags secondary has notoriously been one of the weaker spots of this football team. They've got a lot of skill positions that they need to fill and they need to address in this coming year's draft, and Michael Pittman's going to pick them apart. He's been producing the last 3 weeks here and developing an element of consistency to his fantasy point outputs, which is something that I think shows the next step forward in progression of who he is as an NFL player, and especially for us and our purposes with him in our fantasy lineups. 3 straight 14.5 point or more points in half PPR scoring. And like I said, he's doing it in a variety of different ways. It only took him 4 targets against San Francisco to get that number. He had 15 against the Tennessee Titans, again surpassed that 14.5 point barrier, and then just 6 targets a week ago against the Jets. This is a player who can win splash plays, contested grabs downfield, and frankly, moss defensive backs and corners for incredibly large gains. I think that Michael Pittman is going to be a very, very good player in this league, and we're starting to see that emergence and breakout here in Week 10, which is something, or in the past 3 weeks, which I expect to continue here into Week 10 and make him a must-own player. Mike Williams now. So leading into Week 10, we've got, like a Terry McLaurin, a very large sample size of inconsistency and a 4-game set of 18 or more points of output in half PPR, and we've got 4 other games where we've got 6 or fewer fantasy points from Mike Williams in the production department. So you've got a very large skew and a very large gap of points in between those 2 production outputs. This week, though, I'm expecting Mike Williams and very confident that he can get back into the boom column after 3 straight down performances here against the Minnesota Vikings in Week 10. I think this is a matchup where they can get things done here. We talked about in the last 2 rest of season wide receiver rankings episodes we've done, so this dates all the way back to Week 6 when we started those episodes, I believe it was. Mike Williams is not particularly a consistent fantasy asset, and he's not going to be the player who consistently is the leading player in the target department for the Chargers offense. We talked about Keenan Allen being much more reliable, having a much steadier floor, but maybe not quite the ceiling that Mike Williams has. Mike Williams has a crazy high fantasy ceiling because he's the chuck it up, lob in the back corner of the end zone, fade route, touchdown machine that pumps out these huge scoring outputs, and he was doing that very consistently over the first month and a half of the season because NFL teams had not adjusted to that and because Mike Williams and Justin Herbert were really firing on all cylinders. Now that they've started shading top corners in Mike Williams' direction, in the past 2 matchups in particular have been very, very difficult. That's starting to lead to some of those down games. But Minnesota, flat out on the back end, I don't think they have the personnel right now to stop Mike Williams from having one of these great games. Maybe it's a lesser extent of the other performances we saw so far this season. Maybe he finally gets in between that gap of 18-6 and has a 12 or 14 point game, 60 to 80 yards and a touchdown, whatever the case might be, whatever scoring format you're in. That's going to adjust things obviously one way or another. But I think Mike Williams can get the job done here. Justin Herbert was playing great football last week. I was very impressed from what I saw from him against an Eagles defense that had Darius Slay giving a lot of attention to Mike Williams, and Mike still hit one big ball, a 49-yard pass over the top. If he can just find the end zone, hit 1 or 2 of those in this contest, I think that that's something that could get those numbers back to where we want them here. So it's been a rough stretch of time here. The last month for Mike Williams has been very down as opposed to what it was previously this season. But I think Mike Williams gets back in the productive department here in Week 10. Brandon Aiyuk of the San Francisco 49ers. I love this matchup. I love this player. Brandon Aiyuk has all of the skills, all of the intangibles you look for when finding really good fantasy wide receivers and just finding good NFL receivers in general. His route running, his athletic ability, his dynamic potential to be used in this offense. He came into the season hurt, much like Deebo Samuel did last year, and we almost see the reverse side of things here. So Deebo comes in with a foot injury last year. His numbers are hampered way down in 2020. He's never truly healthy, never fully himself. Brandon Aiyuk now enters this season injured, a hamstring, not really looking twitchy, not looking explosive, and Deebo comes in. He goes full guns a-blazing. Deebo Samuel has been one of the best wide receivers in fantasy up until this point. But now it looks like the big 3 in San Francisco, George Kittle, Brandon Aiyuk, Deebo Samuel, are all healthy and on the field together for the first time. And we saw what that exactly looks like. George Kittle had a productive game, Brandon Aiyuk had a productive game, and Deebo Samuel still had relatively respectable floor value in their Week 9 matchup against the Cardinals. I think Aiyuk, with how good he's looked, with how, again, healthy and back to himself he appears to be, both against the Bears and against the Cardinals last week, I think Aiyuk might be going forward over the back half of the season, a very, very useful and critical player in flex or wide receiver 2 positions and lineups. With this matchup against the Rams, at face value, it appears to be very challenging, but Jalen Ramsey is going to be spending a lot of this game giving all of his undivided attention to Deebo Samuel. That opens up Aiyuk to work against the second or third corner, depending on where he lines up in the formation, almost every play of this game. And we've seen other teams come out and have very, very productive and successful outings working against the corners not named Jalen Ramsey. So I think there's an opportunity for a talented, again, a player who can separate well, who has a very good offense built around him. And again, George Kittle will divert attention away from both of those other 2 wide receivers for an extent as well. I think this bodes very well for Aiyuk coming off his best game of the season. 6 catches, 8 targets, 89 yards, and a touchdown. I'll take Aiyuk as a maybe not strong wide receiver 2 play this week, but certainly a strong flex option. Worst case scenario, I think you can get by with him as a wide receiver 2 here in week 10 though. And then lastly here, Robert Woods. We've got Robert Woods back for this fantasy season, baby. It was a rough start. It was very, very heavily dominated by Cooper Kupp, but they found a way to coexist. Now, Cooper Kupp is clearly far and away the more productive and the more valuable fantasy asset of the 2 right now, but Robert has figured out how to get the job done. Him and Stafford, whatever they needed to do, it's clicking. 6 straight 10-plus point games in half PPR scoring for Robert Woods, again, over the last month and a half now. So taking on San Francisco here, I see no reason why you can't start Robert Woods and go forward with him again. At this point, he's getting back into quality wide receiver 2 range. He's the player we all expected him to be when we drafted him finally. It feels like such a relief to say that. We've been trending upwards for the last few weeks now. I feel safe here after finally having a month and a half long stretch of Robert Woods. But I mean, come on. You've got yourself a San Francisco defense that is, last week they looked atrocious. Colt McCoy absolutely tore this group up, absolutely dominated them. James Conner did his number as well, and we saw a DeAndre Hopkins-less and Kyler Murray-less offense fry this team to shreds. What do good NFL teams do after bad losses? They come back, they get themselves put back together, and they ultimately bounce back. I expect nothing less from the Rams here. This is a much better football team than the San Francisco 49ers are today. They're going to come out here, whether it's Kupp and Woods dominating this one, the run game getting back going, Matt Stafford just not throwing 2 picks in 30 seconds. They're going to figure this thing out, cinch it back together. I'm not worried about the Rams. And Robert Woods, in spite of that performance last week, had dang near 100 yards. He had 98 receiving yards on that contest. So whether it's him in the yardage department, him getting rushing attempts, which we've seen sparingly throughout this season, or him scoring touchdowns, he's found a way to get the job done again. 6 straight weeks of floor production. He's who we thought he was. He scared us there for a second, but Robert Woods is back, and I'm here to celebrate with you guys the rest of this season. All right, those are my 5 must-start wide receivers for Week 10 action now. We're past the halfway marker. This fantasy season is flying by, but I'm glad I'm doing it with you guys, enjoying all of the interactions we have down in the comment section, and helping you guys have a successful season. So thank you all so much for tuning into today's video. If you're still watching today's episode, you're a true supporter here, and we could not appreciate you more and what you do for us here at SFS. So thank you so much for tuning in, you guys. I'll see you next time. Peace out.